Welcome to Pyramid Parent Talk. I'm Karen Harper Royal.
And I'm Lynn Farlow.
We're parents with Pyramid Community Parent Resource Center, providing information and support to parents of children with special needs in New Orleans. Pyramid Community Parent Resource Center, we provide one-to-one assistance, workshops on special education law, positive behavior support, and advocacy skills. You can reach us on the web at www.pyramidparentcenter.org or hit us up on Twitter at PyramidCPRC. And you can call our helpline 504-899-1505. Today we're going to talk about positive behavior supports, what it is and what it isn't. If you'd like to join the discussion today, give us a call at 504-260-9265. Let us know about your experiences with positive behavior support. And let us also know what form of discipline do you use for a child with special needs. Do you spank your child? What works for you? Lynn, we get a lot of calls about behavior. We said that on our last show when we talked about some of the behavior challenges. And what we have discovered is that, there's a lot of talk about positive behavior support. There's some common misconceptions. A lot of times people think that positive behavior support is that we're going to bribe the child or you're going to give the child a treat for being good.
And we know that's called a contingency.
Right. It's a token economy system based on contingencies. And when we have our positive behavior support workshop, we definitely talk about the need to avoid contingencies because that really begins to set the child up for failure.
And, a good example to share with the audience about a contingency is when you go to the store with your child and you say, if you're a good boy or if you're a good girl, then I'm going to buy you some potato chips. Now, is that the right thing to say?
No, it's not the right thing to say, but a lot of times people have been conditioned to do it that way. That's why, I call it like you're trying to bribe the child to be good. And we know that that's not what PBS or positive behavior support really is about. I know sometimes when I'm going to schools for IEP meetings, a lot of times the school leader will be excited. Oh, and we do PBS here. I'm like, oh, that's great. I'm glad to hear you do PBS. Oh, let me show you our school store. And the school leader is always talking more about what they give the kids who have been good or who have met their behavior goals. And that seems to be the only thing they think about or talk about in terms of PBS.
And we know that PBS actually is embedded in the law.
Right. In Louisiana law, in fact, I remember when we were working for this, when the Louisiana legislature enacted some changes to how schools are supposed to do behavior planning and discipline, they require that schools use positive behavior supports as an approach to dealing with discipline and behavior in school.
And plus, they had to go in that direction anyway because the federal law,
right,
IDEA says.
Right, they did that for because the federal law says it, but it's not just for children with disabilities.
Right.
And so that was why we were really excited. I think it was maybe back in 2001 or so, or maybe around 2001 or 3, I think, that they made that change in the Louisiana law. So schools can begin to get to the root causes of some of the negative behaviors that they're seeing in some children.
And the thing that we know about our children who have disabilities, a lot of times they might have this lovely reward system, but our kids never get to participate.
Right. Having 2 sons with attention deficit disorder, there were lots of behavior challenges over the years, and they looked very different in each one of my sons. And for children who are always going to wiggle around and move, if you put a token economy system in and say, well, if you sit still, you'll get a treat at the end of the week.
And
that
we
just
know
doesn't
that
work.
that's just setting them up for failure because
That-
we know that they'll never achieve that goal.
Right. They often don't achieve that goal. I know one of the schools here in the city uses a paycheck system. And I remember going to an IEP meeting, and the mother was very upset because her child was never earning his paycheck. And so we were able to get that school to do something different, to put in place for that child, because that is a token economy system, that paycheck system.
And it's important for parents to realize that they need to participate in that process, in that IEP process, when they're putting, and also when they're putting together a behavioral intervention plan, something that's workable for their children.
Absolutely. And, we're talking a little bit now about what positive behavior support isn't. Parents pretty much, a lot of times people use more negative forms of discipline, even with some children with disabilities. Your daughter has autism.
That's correct.
How would you use, what form of discipline do you use for a child with a significant disability like autism?
Well, early on, I would have many conversations with parents about, Jade's big behaviors. And you would have people say, she's bad, you ought to spank her. Well, I knew better than that, because all I would be doing is showing her how to hit.
Giving negative attention to that negative behavior.
Right, and she wouldn't be able to process that correct, and so then she would be the hitter.
Mm-hmm.
But what I use in PBS a lot is one of the strategies, redirection. So when I see her doing her things, the triggers, when I see her pursing her mouth and bugging her eyes out and letting me know I'm mad right now and I'm about to do something. So some of the things that I would do is, let's talk about different things. Let's talk about family members. What did you do today? And that's a redirection.
Now, some
getting her
people may
off.
not see that as a form of discipline. Sometimes in our head we think back to how it was when we were a child. You do something wrong, I'm going to pop you. Some people think that it needs to be something negative. I mean, there are ways to deal with challenging behaviors without having to hit a child, whether or not they have a disability.
Absolutely. So redirection is a strategy.
And so it's important for our listeners to understand that using redirection, you're still disciplining your child. Because a lot of times people, again, only see hitting as discipline. And really, when you look discipline up, discipline means to teach.
And we love to say that
right
in our workshop.
Right.
That's what it is, when you're disciplined. And, culturally, we spank. And we know there's many reasons for that. And we have a very healthy discussion about spanking in our workshop. And we know that, well, let's use Dr. Phil's words. And how does that work for you?
Yeah, how's that working for you?
Yeah.
And I know in my life, with my first son, I absolutely spanked. I didn't know anything. I hadn't discovered pyramid at that time, and those early years especially. And I simply did not know any better. But one thing I noticed, that it wasn't changing his behavior. Now, years, fast forward several years, and by the time I started disciplining my second child, spanking, it was just unnecessary, because by then I had learned a lot of the strategies of positive behavior support. And, it really is a different way of being with your child. And having almost 10 years difference between my two sons and me doing discipline in a different way, I can definitely attest to the fact that positive behavior support produce long-lasting behavior changes, and it really helped the child to learn how to manage his own behavior.
And as you're reflecting back, it's making me reflect back on before Jade reached puberty, Jade was an easygoing little girl. I didn't have any problems with her from a behavioral standpoint. And then when she reached puberty, I like to say that Jade died, and then a new one came on the scene. And I was so happy that I was already in the process of learning about positive behavior support. And I knew the strategies. I knew the things that I needed to do. And I understood that it was a new way of being with my child. It was a new way of being for the whole family. Because what do we want? We want to be able to be independent and not have that just hang over us.
Okay, I see we have a call, line 3. We have Patrick on the line. Hi, Patrick.
Hi, Ms. Roy. I heard you on the radio with Oliver in the morning, and I was dying to catch up with you because you spoke with so much knowledge. And I have a nephew whom I'm taking care of, and it's slightly the topic I want to talk about was the IEP more than the discipline. But I can tell you a quick story about my discipline issue.
Please do. Please do.
Yes, I used to whip him, and he has sort of like a learning disability, but he's not a behavior problem. He's just a regular, precocious little kid who gets in trouble. And I remember, I always try not to whip him. So I remember one day he came in, and it just broke my heart. He came in, and he just immediately pulled down his pants.
Oh.
And I said, Lord, what am I doing to this child? And it was like 2 years ago, and he's 10 now. And from that moment forward, I never whipped him again. I have to be honest with you, I've done a little bit of everything. I've done the positive support. I've done the PED. I've done a little bit of everything. Now it's more of a since he's 10, I can be more authoritative with him, and I correct his issues in that way. But I don't necessarily degrade or look down on people who does corporal punishment. But I just think that so many times people don't do it immediately when it needs to be done, and in a quick manner. They sort of take out their frustrations while they're whipping the child because they mad at what the child done as opposed to trying to teach the child something that they did wrong.
You brought up a really important point. You talked about your nephew having a learning disability. And, I remember back in the day, I would whip my son because he didn't do his homework or something like that, not realizing that his learning disability was getting in the way. And so whipping the child wasn't going to change the fact that he had a learning disability, and
Right.
what he needed was to be taught how to get the work done, taking into consideration how he learns. And so when I was just resorting to whipping, I really was not teaching him what he needed to know because he really couldn't help what was going on at that time without being taught differently. So,
Well, and that's been the topic that mostly I wanted to call you about because when you talked about it that morning, are you familiar with Jefferson Parish as well as Orleans Parish and RNC?
I am not as familiar with Jefferson Parish since I pretty much work just in Orleans Parish. I know education. I'm familiar with education in Louisiana generally, but in terms of the specifics of the different schools and stuff in Jefferson Parish, I don't have as much information.
But I'm assuming the rules apply just the same as far as going through the process of getting your child having an assessment.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely, because that's based on federal law, and we're going to definitely talk about that. Our next show, not this next Tuesday, but the following one, will be on IDEA, that federal law. But continue.
So, he was having problems. He's been in the 4th grade, and of course, he failed the LEAP, and now he's in. He took the LEAP again in the summer. We're waiting on the results. And before he took the first LEAP, I went and I tried to get him along with his mother. I tried to get him to have an assessment, but the school just took forever to do the assessment, and they just gave us. I went to every meeting but they kept giving me the runaround about why they couldn't do the assessment or why it was taking so long. So many people were out. And this person wasn't in, and
so
I haven't. got the assessment done, even though we waited over a year now. It's been over a year, and I still haven't got the assessment done, and we don't know if he's going to make it to the 5th grade or not. So I'm kind of looking for some help and some guidance on how to hold their feet to the fire to know whether or not he has a learning disabilities that requires special treatment.
Patrick, why don't you? It would be great if you or your wife or your child's mother can come to one of our IDEA workshops. That would be a good place to start, because if you knew all of your rights regarding that and time frames in terms of how they're supposed to get back to you, that's important. So if you would call our helpline at 504-899-1505 and leave us a message on that helpline, we can get the information to you.
And also
899-1505.
Yes. But also, we're going to have a small group meeting next Tuesday, right, Lynn?
Yes, at the Rosa Keller Library.
From 10 to noon at the Rosa Keller Library on Broad Street here in New Orleans. We'll have a small group meeting, and you could bring any documents you have that actually I'm not going to be there. Lynn is going to be there. And DJ Marquis, our boss, will be there, and they can spend a lot more time with you, talking out what needs to happen.
Okay. I'm definitely going to call that number now and leave a message. And if somebody gets back to me, because I'm driving, I'm not able to write down the time. But if y'all can call me back and tell me when the meet is next Tuesday, I promise you I will be there.
Okay, if you can hold on for a second and leave your number with the producer, we'll give you a call.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Okay, so Lynn, we talked a little bit about what positive behavior support is not. What I want to do now is just read what a simple definition of what positive behavior support is. Okay, so positive behavior support is a new way of looking at behavior. It uses many approaches to replace challenging behavior with appropriate behavior, respecting the person, giving attention to positive behavior, ignoring negative behavior when possible, finding out the purpose of the behavior, and teaching new skills. That's a simple definition of positive behavior support that we use in our workshops. And notice, it didn't say positive behavior support is giving a child a reward for being good. It didn't say that. And so, we have these 7 strategies that we go through during the workshop. You want to talk a little bit about some of those strategies, Lynn?
Yes. So there are 7 strategies for positive behavior support. And the first one is that you want to give positive reinforcement for positive behavior. And we like to say, catch them while they're being good, when they're doing the good stuff. And that's very simple things. Like, for instance, if you're on the phone with someone and you have a child that constantly interrupts, then when they check their behavior on their own, then you want to give positive reinforcement for that behavior. Praise them, and praise them in a sincere way. So that's the first strategy. And the second strategy is you want to ignore problem behaviors when possible.
And, you can't ignore everything. We get that. But there are some things, and I know over the years I learned to ignore the whistling. My oldest son's a musician, and I guess he had music in him a long time ago. And I remember when I used to fuss at him, boy, stop all that whistling, But that was something I did grow to ignore.
And a lot of parents in our workshops, they don't see those kinds of things as things that they can ignore. But when they really think about it, those are simple things to ignore. Mm-hmm. And if you don't call attention to it, then a child is like, okay, they're not paying attention to me, so maybe I should be doing something else. So that's a strategy. And we talked about this earlier, redirect the child's attention. You have to, when you see your child's triggers, and if you observe and pay attention to your child, you know the triggers. When you see them going in a direction that you do not want them to go, some behaviors that's going to escalate, then redirect them. Do something else with that child. So that's the third strategy. And 4 is changing the environment. And care in the environment can be anything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It could be if you're in the grocery store and you know that child is going to start bothering you when you go down that aisle with the candy, then don't go down that aisle. Go on a different aisle.
Particularly for my child and children who have autism, you have to pay attention to your environment. You do not want to bring them into environments that's going to create those big behaviors. And you have to use planning when you're going out with your children so that you know that you're going to avoid certain environments. Sometimes you end up in environments and you don't even know. And then you have to do something about
in
that.
a certain environment and this was an issue for me with both my sons, that requires people to just sit quietly, then I need to make sure I bring something for them to keep themselves occupied. Whether it was a notepad, a sketch pad. My younger son loved to draw, or just something that they can fidget with, because they are going to move around and they might even get loud if I don't keep them otherwise occupied. So you also need to manage that environment if you can't change the environment.
And what about when you have people in the environment? That's the problem.
Right. Sometimes certain people set you off, so it might set off, a person with a disability, especially a person who might have certain obsessions. And so sometimes you can't have certain people around.
And I know that's a tough one, but that's something that you have to take into consideration for that child who has those kind of behaviors. Another one is increased predictability and scheduling. That's important. That's big.
That was absolutely key in my life, to have a predictable schedule. This is what time you get up. This is what by this time you need to be through in the bathroom, washing your face, brushing your teeth, and all that. That kind of scheduling keeps our lives much calmer. And I don't have to get into this back and forth arguing about go do this, go do that. You know what you're supposed to do, when you're supposed to do it, and this is the way we do it every day.
And a lot of times, so they have the schedule at school, and then they come home, and it's this relaxed environment. Well, a lot of times you have to have a schedule at home.
Absolutely.
It has to be predictable at home, and that'll keep down the surfacing of behaviors. And your life will be better. Everybody's life will be better if you have that kind of scheduling going on.
And one thing I want to say about that, if you notice that your child all of a sudden is having some new big behaviors, find out if the schedule at school has changed.
Right, or anything else.
Right. But sometimes when a schedule changes at school, it brings in a whole new set of problems that you might not have planned for before. So that's just something people should take into consideration.
And that was often the case with my daughter. When I didn't know that there was a big change going on, when she didn't know. And this is something that you have to preach inside of meetings, that, you have to plan for those changes in schedule.
Absolutely.
And so the last two strategies is offer choices. We know that choices promote independence, and that's what you're looking for. And the last skill is teach a new skill. You want to replace those negative behaviors with a new skill that person can achieve.
Absolutely. And so we have another call. We have Miss Cherie on line 3. Go ahead, Miss Cherie.
Hi, Karen. Hi, Karen and Lynn.
Hey, Cherie.
I'm so glad that you have this program on as a service for our parents. It is sorely needed, but I was wondering if you also have this service for schools, and if you could talk a little bit about how schools can come into compliance with the federal law, and let us know how charter schools are doing with this issue.
Well, this is always a challenge. Schools use positive behavior support. They have something called school-wide positive behavior support, and that all schools are supposed to do this, but some schools do a better job than others, or that's I was going to say some schools are worse at it than others, but I'm going to keep it on the positive. Some schools do a better
Since
job
we're talking
than others.
about positive behavior support.
But this is why we teach parents, because parents have to be the checks and balances. And once parents begin to use these strategies in their life at home, and we also encourage our parents who come to our positive behavior support workshop to also go to the advocacy skills and the IDEA workshop, so that then they learn how to bring this to the school. If they have a child who has challenging behaviors, the school should have a behavior plan in place. And so when parents sit at that table at schools, they are an equal partner at the table, and it's good for parents to have information. And so the best information they're going to have is their own experiences using these strategies at home, and so they're definitely going to be able to speak from a position of authority and experience in what works for their child. They are the expert on their child.
Yeah.
And so as much as I would like to say that we go in and do these workshops for schools, we don't, but schools have access to professionals who do that for them. And so it's not as if they don't know where to find this information. They can find it from the same places we find it, and they can do this. But it's, you know how it is with the schools. You've been there.
Yeah.
They will do what you make them do. And so that's why we want parents to do that.
The charter schools are in compliance?
Most of the schools use a token economy system. They don't use positive behavior supports in the ways that we teach parents to use positive behavior supports. So,
okay.
Many of them have some kind of token economy system, but it's important that we tell them and show them that especially when it's not working for the child, that we need to do something different.
And they know what it looks like. They know that it's a 3-tiered process from the behavior standpoint. They know that most of the children in the first and second tiers, they know what's supposed to happen with those kids. And then when you get to that 3rd tier, they know that they should be collecting data and doing functional behavioral assessments. They know this.
I see. Okay.
Okay. Well,
Thank you
thanks
very
for
much.
calling in, Cherie.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So, wow, this time goes by so fast. So, Lynn, tell us what we have coming up. Our next meeting is on the 30th, July 30th. I was going to say January 30th.
It's July 30th, and it's a small parent meeting, and we ask that you come, and whatever issues that you may have regarding your child with a disability, whether it's with schools and how to function inside of school, getting the right kind of IEP implemented, so you can discuss anything that you want at that particular workshop. And then we also, on August 17th and 24th, we're conducting a positive behavior support workshop. That's 2 consecutive Saturdays. And go to our website at www.pyramidparentcenter.org to get the information as to where it'll be, and it's going to be from 9 to 3.
And it's a 2-part workshop. It's important that you attend both parts of the workshop.
And also, for our next radio show, which is two Tuesdays from now, we'll be discussing IDEA and help you get prepared for the upcoming school year.
Yes.
Regarding the law.
Yeah, Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. School's going to be starting. Our Patrick said that he was trying to get this IEP, so definitely we need you to come to that IDEA workshop. Listen to the show, of August 6th for the IDEA information. We will have an IDEA workshop coming up. So we want to thank everybody for listening in. This has been Pyramid Parent Talk.
And remember, you're never alone.